little thing about bromeliads. If you've ever wondered why your bromeliad you buy from the store dies right after it blooms, it's because they die right after they bloom.
Yeah, they only bloom once.
Right. Most bromeliads.
And my honorable mention is the string of pearls, Senecio rollianus. And, yep.
Your what hurts you?
Rollianus.
Gotcha.
Yep. Which is kind of interesting, as it looks kind of like...
Okay. Do we have...
Oh, we didn't come up with names.
Yeah.
Root rubbers. I think about root rubbers a lot.
I bet you do.
Inigo monsteras.
That's a very specific reference.
Hello, my name is Inigo Monstera. You propagated my father. Prepare
to die. Hey there, take it or leave it listeners, a.k.a. Green Team, a.k.a. Hort Homies, a.k.a. Root Rubbers, a.k.a. Floam Phillips.
Floam Fellas. Floam Fellas, there we go.
We are the Flora
Xylem
Fellas.
Zachary's.
Okay, and cutting Ethan off here. I'm Nick Farringdon.
Dendro dudes. Dendro means trees. Relating to trees.
I'm Nick Farringdon.
I'm Nick Farringdon.
And I'm here with my co-host, Ethan Wise.
That's right.
Who is doing a great job so far this recording. And we are coming to you guys today with another quick episode on houseplants. We wanted to cover this topic a little bit. This is one that we can always certainly touch on more. It's such a broad category that people are so very interested in.
Yeah, since COVID, we saw both while we were kind of working in the industry still. COVID dramatically increased the houseplant popularity.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
It was crazy just how much the houseplant world just boomed and got to the point where vendors who would never run out of inventory were running out of inventory. Basic plants like just a philodendron cordatum, just a standard trailing green philodendron that would be everywhere for $10 to $20 is now costing wholesale $20.
Mm-hmm.
It was great. We are seeing a little bit of like things are getting back to, I guess, what I would consider a more normal price range for houseplants from wholesalers. But wow, what an intense ride that was.
Yeah.
And like this resurgence of rare houseplants.
Mm-hmm.
No longer was your standard Sansevieria zeylanica cool. Like, oh, that's vanilla. Like,
right. Oh, your Sansevieria is just green.
Right. Like
just regular green.
Right.
Oh, it has a yellow edge. Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
It's like, what about Bantel Sensation?
So, since this is such a popular topic, we wanted to bring essentially a top 6, bottom 6, our most favorite and least favorite.
Our least favorites, yes.
Houseplants. And we're doing top 6, bottom 6 so that we can each do 3 and 3. And
not have a 3-hour-long episode, because you and I could very easily talk about houseplants and tropicals, especially with our background.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
We've both been buyers at a large garden center for houseplants and tropicals. Yep. We've been to TPIE, which is a tropical show.
Plant International Expo in Florida every year. And
Huge.
that is
hundreds, would you say hundreds, or at least dozens and dozens of wholesale vendors.
Yes.
And only open to...
No, open to the public.
It is open to the public?
Yeah, it's $20 for a ticket to get in. It's open to the public.
But they're giving wholesale pricing away, like, blatantly.
Yeah, but I don't think a lot of them have a minimum, so you can't.
Well,
just
I guess even as a civvy, going in there, you're not going to be able to buy the plants wholesale.
Probably not. I mean, unless you're really wanting a big quantity.
Okay.
Yeah. Although some of the ones that had, do you remember, I think you guys stopped there after the show, that one that had like very specifically only rare or strange, unusual variegations of more popular varieties of houseplants.
Mhm.
I think they would sell one-offs, but you're going to pay $50, $100 for like a 6-inch houseplant. Very expensive stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Didn't you get a variegated whale fin Sansevieria?
So
from
that
one
was
of them?
one of the vendors there, and this was a few years ago, but yeah, one of the vendors there had a local garden center there in Florida.
Sure.
So it was like half an hour away from the expo, and I went there and I bought 2 of their whalefin Sansevierias back before whalefin Sansevierias were as common as they are currently.
Sure.
So I found like a variegated one that had this great kind of white and green striping with a yellow margin, like a very pronounced yellow margin around that leaf, and they were selling at $35, which, retail, because they had so many of them.
Sure.
And they were so easy for them to propagate. I mean, hell, in Florida, I saw people who had Sansevierias as hedges.
Yeah.
In Florida, I was like, oh, what a cool thing.
Yeah.
So
that is open to the public. At least last time I went there and looked at ticket prices, it's of the big plant and horticulture shows in the country, that's one of the cheaper ones to get into at $20.
yeah, that's
I
not
know
bad.
like Cultivate in Ohio, which is more industry specific to horticulture people.
Much more specific.
That's like
yes.
$400 to get into if you want to go to the different courses and stuff that they have. But Florida, the biggest cost would be your travel and your Airbnb or whatever to stay.
Yeah.
So that's definitely worth checking out for anybody who's really into houseplants. It's once a year in January in Florida every year. So perfect time
Good
to go.
time. Yeah, exactly. Good
If you
time.
live in the Midwest
Yeah, I remember we went there and it's like
or Northeast
we're in
or
end of
Northwest.
January and we're sitting not too far away from a beach and in shorts drinking tropical alcoholic beverages. It's like, okay, I can get behind this.
Yeah, we should probably go to the show every year. Yeah. Just to keep up on
I hate
just
Midwest winter.
Just to keep up on the industry. Yeah.
I get that the Midwest winter, some people really love it, but blah. Yeah. Anyway, way off tangent. So we've been to TPIE. We've both been the buyer for garden centers to bring in these sort of plants, figuring out what's going to be popularly sold, figuring out price points, this and the other. Plus, we both have our own large collection.
Yeah,
of
not only
houseplants
dealing
and tropicals,
with shipping them up from Florida, literally buying semi-loads full of these houseplants and tropicals to keeping them alive in the garden center setting.
merchandising.
Right. To also having quite a few of our own personal collections. I know I have killed probably hundreds of houseplants at this point. Pretty much only the strong survive. You tend to pay attention to your houseplants a little more than I do.
To an extent, I don't like houseplants that need a lot of maintenance.
Right.
I prefer a plant that wants to be here.
Right.
I don't have ferns. I have one for 151, 152.
Some ferns.
The 2 ferns in the shower.
Oh, yep. So before we started this recording, we knew we wanted to talk about some of our most and least favorite, or least
favorites.
Houseplants, which is tough to narrow down. I mean, we could probably say a top 50, bottom 50 if we really wanted to, but we were talking about this and I said to Ethan, well, you still have way, way, way more houseplants than I do. And you had said, well, not so much anymore. You've slimmed it down quite a bit. And I go, I don't know. I think what was my guess? I was guessing like 237 or something like that.
Which probably once upon a time, yes.
Yeah. And so we went around and did a physical count.
Yeah.
And
152 houseplants.
Yeah.
Is what I have.
So
I might know enough to talk about
a little bit
about caring for your houseplants or tropicals.
Right. So do you want to go ahead and kick us off? Do we want to start with a top 6 first?
Yeah, let's do our favorites first.
Cool. Go for it.
Okay, so my 3 that I picked, and I realize that there are, this is just our opinions, and there's so many cool houseplants, and there are reasons to have favorite houseplants for so many different categories. So of course, these are just ones that are
personal favorites of yours.
Personal favorites of mine.
Yep.
And number 1 for me is my burgundy rubber tree, my Ficus elastica.
Yep.
And I know that is a really common houseplant anymore. I mean, you can find that at box stores just as easily as you're going to find it at just about any independent garden center.
Sure.
And this particular ficus tree or rubber tree has that nice burgundy, sometimes brown, depending on what light it's getting, if it gets a lot of shade, it'll start to kind of fade more of a green tone. The more sun it gets, the more purpley brown tones that it gets. The new foliage comes out kind of this orangey tone sometimes. Can get pretty large even as a houseplant.
Yeah,
but
I've known some people that had them grow up, hit their ceiling, and then they had to chop them back and let them re-sprout at the nubs.
Right. And this really is in the family of true rubber trees. The sap that they produce when you break a stem does produce that sticky, white, milky sap. But the reason why that's number one for me is because the one that I currently have, which has been cut back significantly prior to our move, it was probably almost double the size that it currently is now. And I would say right now
yours was just about hitting ceiling in your place
huge.
too, right? Yeah.
So it was 4 foot. I think it's currently now like 4 foot by maybe 3 foot. Prior to us moving, it was definitely taller than me.
Yeah.
So I would say 7+ feet and maybe 5 feet wide or so. And the reason why I like mine is because mine started as a tip cutting 10 years ago when I was taking a propagation class when I was getting one of my hort degrees.
Yep.
And we all propagated plants, and mine survived and has just since grown from the tiny little tip cutting, 3 or 4 inches from the top apical portion of this, because some people did leaf cuttings, some people did the middle of a stem cutting. I chose the apical cutting, and it's been with me for a decade through thick and thin. This thing,
multiple apartments, house that you rented,
right,
traveling out of state,
and this plant can tolerate everything. I'm not saying put it through hell the same way mine has been, but my rubber tree and I have an understanding with each other, I think. And mine's been in full sun, like south facing, like the kind of southern heat that makes your door handle too hot to touch.
Yeah.
It's tolerated everything from that to a dark, dank corner in a house with maybe half an hour of direct sunlight coming through a window that's being filtered through a spruce tree.
That was when it was pretty tall, and it was definitely stretching.
Yeah.
But
wasn't its
not
happiest,
a lot of light. Yeah.
to the point of being in a plastic container with no drainage and sitting after a torrential downpour, completely waterlogged in that container for days before I tipped it over and drained it out, to forgetting to water it for 8 months, when it's like drying up. And this plant has been through everything. So that's my number one, because I will probably have that plant forever, hopefully. And it just started as a tip cutting when I was just a little baby hort student. So my number 2, golden barrel cactus, my Echinocactus grusonii. And that, I've always loved that plant. I think it's just as a cool one. But mine, why I love so much is I've never repotted it from the original plastic container I bought it in. It's been in the same pot. It's probably tripled in size. And this thing also absolute neglect. Nothing needs it. When it's outside, it gets what nature provides. Whenever it rains, it gets rainwater. When it comes inside, it can go anywhere, whether it's a sunny window or an area of the house where there is not a lick of sunlight whatsoever.
And that's usually in winter when the day length is shorter and it would be slowing itself down anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
And to the point where it'll be inside for half the year, and sometimes in an area of the house where there is no window even remotely nearby. And if it's lucky, it gets like the bottom of a water bottle or the bottom of my water glass or something. And I'm like, I didn't drink all my water. And I'm like, oh, well, I'll just give it 2 tablespoons of water this month. And this plant has just thrived. And it started from it was a Home Depot rescue.
Yep.
Not my top choice for buying plants, certainly.
And that was probably,
6 years ago.
6 years ago, yeah.
And it was just gorgeous, cantaloupe-sized golden barrel cactus. I think I bought it for $20.
Yeah.
And now
around the time they figured out how they could propagate those a lot easier.
Right.
Than like slowly growing them from seed.
Right, which takes
an eternity.
Decades to get to a sellable size. So now mine is basketball size, just about. So it's really grown quite a bit. I would say, gosh, if mine was sold in a garden center right now, it'd probably be like it's pretty large. It's like $150 plant maybe.
Probably, yeah.
So I love that just because it's so cool. It's one of my favorites. It's a self-defense weapon in case I need it. You know, if I'm ever feeling threatened, I'll just take that and throw it towards whatever is threatening me, and would probably act as at least somewhat of a deterrent, enough for me to scoot along pretty quickly, hopefully, to grab another cactus to use as a self-defense weapon. So yeah, my golden barrel cactus, number 2. And my third favorite, just because it's such a cool, fun thing, is my adenium, or desert rose. And the variety that I have is adenium obesum. And it's called obesum literally because it's got fat trunk, and which is really a caudex. So the caudex being this sort of hybridized trunk,
like bulbous, above ground root
that
structure,
stores nutrients in the caudex, in this sort of root trunk bulb hybrid. And because of this nature of it, it can store nutrients and moisture for a long period of time. So in a way, you treat it like a cactus. It doesn't need to be watered heavily at all.
And you said in winter, yours pretty much drop their leaves and go fully dormant.
Always remind people that, because I've talked to several people who have thrown them away over winter because they thought they were dead.
Sure.
Because they drop all the foliage. So yes, I have 3. One of them I've just recently purchased. But the 2 that I have had, one I've had much longer than the other, has pink flowers, and then my smaller one has yellow flowers. So the pink flowering one, which is the more common one that you'll find, it's a gorgeous flower. Kind of looks like a mandevilla or a diplodenia. Large bell-shaped flower, just beautiful, long-lasting bloom. And it just looks so good. It's very kind of a bonsai-esque, just a natural sort of bonsai-esque look to it, which I'm also attracted to. And it can be in a small pot. It doesn't have a vigorous root system because, like I said before, being that caudex type of plant, it stores most of its nutrients in its quote-unquote trunk, kind of like a ponytail palm. So very minimal care as well. You can see that's my general theme. I like plants that have a low maintenance characteristic to them. But yeah, be prepared if you find that plant. Just know that there's a really good chance that unless you are overwintering it in a greenhouse and you bring it inside over winter, it will likely defoliate. You can reduce your watering dramatically. And there you go. Those are my top 3. Although my honorable mention, I have one honorable mention, and that's my blue glow agave. And I have a large agave collection anyway, but my blue glow I think is my favorite because of how large it has gotten, and quickly, in a interior setting without being outside in full sun, hot, dry. It's gotten quite large just being in my house. Also, same thing, gets what nature provides when I put it outside. And when it comes inside, it can go in an area nowhere near a window and completely thrive. And maybe if it's lucky, I give it a few, licks of water here and there. And it's a spineless variety, so it doesn't have those alligator teeth on it. Very sharp points to the foliage and very rigid leaves, but it doesn't have those teeth margins, or the teeth margins are so small that it's not going to just stab your finger if you handle
like
that.
Most agave.
Right. My gosh, they're such violent plants.
Right.
So those are my top 3 and my honorable mention.
And I'll jump into my top 3 then.
Tag.
So my first one, and it's a very low maintenance, easy to care for foliage plant. Just visually, I've always been attracted to these, and that is the Brazil philodendron, or Brazil variegated philodendron. You see it called a couple different things. It's your very typical vining, smaller leafed, trailing philodendron. It's got the dark green outer edges of the leaves, and then through the center is kind of a chartreusey stripe. So you have that nice bicolor contrast on the leaves. Like a lot of those trailing philodendrons, or visually, a lot of people confuse them with the pothos. So most people that recognize that would be able to picture that. Just one of those, if you have a bright sunny window, it could adapt to that. If you have a lower lit interior room and it can get some bright indirect light, adapts to that. They will tend to be thicker and fuller in a sunnier spot.
And have probably a little more pronounced variegation.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, just very easy, low maintenance. You don't have to keep them watered super frequently. They'll show you the leaves will start to curl up a little bit if you don't give them a drink.
But mine, I've forgotten to water mine for a month, if not more.
Yeah, I can tell.
Yeah. It's totally fine. It's like, needs a drink.
Yep.
Yeah.
And number 2, kind of a category as a whole, but then I'll list a specific that's a favorite, is the group of zygocacti. And that could be anything from Christmas cactus, which is probably the one that people would be most familiar with. There's also Thanksgiving cactus, tend to bloom earlier than Christmas cactus, hence the name. And then my favorite, which is probably the one that's toughest to track down, and when you do see them, they sell out very quickly, is generally called the Easter cactus.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Easter cactus is visually more distinct from the other, what you'd normally think of as the Christmas cactus or the Thanksgiving, because the edges are more smooth and scalloped rather than kind of having those little points that the Christmas and Thanksgiving cactus can have to varying levels.
It's kind of like just telling people, it's like, yeah, Easter cactus, Easter egg shaped.
Yeah, Easter egg shaped with a little
Leaf.
a little smooth scalloping.
Sure.
Yeah, just something about those visually. I really like them. The blooming is very similar to a Christmas cactus or a Thanksgiving cactus, although maybe a little more shorter of a bloom, whereas some of the Christmas cacti can have kind of that longer,
Oh, sure.
like a penstemon type flower, a salvia type flower that you'd think of a hummingbird trying to get their little beak in, that kind of shape. Lots of bright colors. And so something that's different with those, as opposed to some of the cacti varieties that Ethan mentioned, is that they're more of a tropical cacti. And so for those of us who like to overcare for our cacti and probably water them a little more than they would like, this is perfect.
I think that's the number one reason when people say, yeah, my succulents or my cacti keep dying. It's like, because you're caring.
Yeah, stop what? Yeah.
Neglect is key.
Only care about those like once a month.
Like,
Right.
I wouldn't spit on my cacti. It doesn't even deserve that much moisture.
And so with these zygocacti, I wouldn't water them as often as weekly like you would do some of your other houseplants or your foliage plants, but every other week you could definitely get away with that and have less of a risk of killing it by overwatering than you would with some of your other more desert type cacti.
And you have a cool variegated one.
Yeah, that
How's it
you got
doing?
me. It looks good. Yeah, it's going to take a while for it to, it's kind of just been hanging out. It's a little, 3-inch little pot.
That's
a
about right.
variegated. And that was more the Christmas cactus type, I believe.
Okay. I
Yeah.
couldn't remember if it had like the...
It has the
The
little
more-
points.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm excited to see that one get bigger and see what color it ends up being.
Mm-hmm.
And then...
I think it's supposed to be like a magenta.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
I thought that would look really cool.
Yeah, on the variegated. Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. And it's a very light green with the kind of yellow white. So that's a little different. And then my number 3, this is a little more of a funky leaf-shaped variety than the common jade plant that a lot of people are familiar with, and that's the ripple jade. And so think of it as a regular jade succulent, but the leaf has a kind of fun, twisty swirl to it, that hence the name ripple. And this one's a little bit of a nostalgic one for me. Years ago, I think I was still in college, I bought at a small local garden shop a little 4 or 5 inch pot of these ripple jade, and there were 2 or 3 plants in there, and I split them up, and I potted up one for myself, and I gave one to my brother. Mine, I probably cared about too much at one point or another and ended up killing it, but my brother's that's in the sunroom at our parents' house, it is still in the same little 5-inch square glazed pot that I gave it to him in years ago. And even though there's high light in that sunroom, it's still light coming in through windows. And since it's a desert variety, it wants to reach for that sunlight. And what it's done, being at the edge of a shelf, it's sort of kind of draped itself over the edge. And it really looks, it's like the jade version of when you see those juniper bonsais is the closest kind of shape I could describe it as.
That dramatic kind of going off
That
to one
sweep.
side.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. So it's I've never seen another jade do that before. It's got the thick kind of segmented stems, all those characteristics, but it looks like a funky bonsai shape.
Just naturally formed that way.
Yep. Just kind of did that on its own. We do finally have another pot for it. I don't think it's been repotted yet, but
Just put
it's
You're just gonna put
just-
it inside the larger
right.
pot while it's still in its other side. Yeah. I could see your brother doing that. Done.
Right. That would be pretty funny. And it'd probably grow. It'd probably root out the
Double
bottom
in
and grow.
size.
Yeah. And so I do have one other honorable mention, also sort of nostalgic factor as well, but also very low maintenance like these others on my list. And that is a variety. I don't know exactly what cultivar it is, but it is a type of much larger leafed, almost football sized, not quite, but almost football sized, just straight green leaved philodendron, a trailing type.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one that I think 35 years ago, one of my mom's clients gave it to her, and it was a philodendron that her mom had prior. And so this is a cutting that now is probably 40 years old, give or take. She has taken cuttings and repotted over time, and it got to the point where they had this on a piece of furniture about 4 feet off the ground and some pretty big size pots. And between these 4 pots of philodendron, it fully trailed down the piece of furniture and onto the floor. So probably like 6 feet of trailing philodendron vines that was just from one original little cutting. As I have gotten more into horticulture and pressured my mom into watering her plants more often when I visit, she has grown her collection and gone into doing more cuttings with this. I know lately it was getting so trailing and out of hand that she decided to take quite a few cuttings and repot and get some smaller containers going of it. But that one plant kind of started, I mean, it's been in our house around my whole entire lifetime. That plant has been there and just hanging out, getting water occasionally, getting fertilized. Whenever I say, hey, Mom, here's some Osmocote for your philodendron, and just absolutely bulletproof.
Yeah.
Now, it is in full sun. I very rarely see that type of vining philodendron with a leaf that big.
The leaves are huge.
Which is kind of unusual to me.
And like, it would be a cool surprise to find out, like, what if it's just like the basic Philodendron cordatum, but just
I have wanted to get it tested,
so
genetic tested. Yeah.
Happy that it's growing like it would in its native environment, you know, because some of those types of philodendrons, if they're in this perfect environment, they will, as they're growing up a tree, develop large melon soccer ball sized leaves.
Yep.
But it's so uncommon to see in your house, though, with that type of trailing philo.
Right. I do have one cutting of it at my place. It maybe gets like 4 or 5 inch long leaves. Still a little bit bigger even than the typical philodendron.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm not sure exactly what variety it is. I do hope to find somebody who could test it for me someday and find out what it is. I'd love to do a tissue culture experiment with that and get some clones of it. But that's something down the road that I've always
nerd.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. Well, geez. Okay. It's personal attack. Hey, Ethan, do you hear that?
What?
Oh, it's an ad.
Real quick, thanks for listening to our episode today. You can stay in touch with us by supporting us on Patreon. We are at patreon.com/takeItOrLeafIt.
And we'll have bonus content on Patreon for all of our subscribers there, where you can get extra episodes and snippets from the show that we don't release to all the other platforms.
You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Take It or Leaf It Pod. And you can also visit our website, takeItOrLeafItPod.com. If you have any questions or comments or any stories you'd like us to research or talk about, or hell, send us a picture of a plant you want us to identify, you can send that information to show@takeItOrLeafItPod.com. You can also follow us on our individual Instagrams. I am at Hortwise, HORTWISE.
And I am at Farringdon, NFARRINGDON.
Thanks so much. We'll get back to the episode. You got me. All right. So that's your honorable mention.
That was my honorable mention.
And it might have made it in the top 3 if you actually knew what it was.
If I knew exactly the variety, it definitely would have been in the top 3, but I feel like I can only honorable mention it because I couldn't even tell you what variety it is.
What if it comes back something totally different?
Right? It's not a philodendron.
It's cordyline.
Right. So what are your bottom 3?
Okay, so we're going to go to the least favorites now.
Yep.
Now, I want to preface this and say, this is not an attack on any listener who might find my bottom 3 to be in their top 3.
Yeah.
This is from my experience, and these plants that I'm going to list are cool plants. In my experience, though, I just don't like them as houseplants.
Sure.
I just don't think they have worked out well. And I've tried them, I would say, at least 2 times each
Sure.
of the plants that I'm going to list, and cannot. And also, many other people, this is coming like a vicarious other people telling me they have also struggled with keeping these plants alive.
Sure.
So mine is number 1. Now this one I really just don't like. And I know that I've talked to like 5 people who have kept some of these alive looking gorgeous, but the croton.
Yep.
The croton, in my opinion,
looks best when it just came from the nursery in Florida.
Like outside can look gorgeous. It can, in a container arrangement.
Gets the reds and yellows and oranges, or even purple coloration in the leaves, depending on the variety.
And sometimes some of the cultivars are just like yellow and green, or just like have more of like an orange tone to them. But some of the more popular, the like a rainbow plant.
It's a great plant for color,
right?
As just a foliage plant.
Right. And like looks great in containers. It needs that humidity that it gets naturally outside. And I've definitely seen and created container arrangements with crotons that look gorgeous. Inside, though, it's a shitty fucking houseplant. So I hate the croton as a houseplant. I have nothing good to say about it as a houseplant. I don't think it should ever exist as a houseplant. Anyone who is buying the croton as a houseplant is likely buying it because of that beautiful color.
It really needs to be treated like an exterior, like a tropical foliage annual.
Right.
That you're going to buy every year.
So in your house,
to have it look its best.
Right. It's very hard to mimic the humidity in your house
and the amount of light.
Right. Yeah. That you need to maintain it. Most people who have tried growing that inside their house, one of the first things they start to realize is the foliage starting to drop.
Or the color change. If they're not getting high light, that red, orange, yellow, that color gradient that you get when you buy those at the store, it will start going to green and yellow, especially the new growth.
I think a lot of people who have tried to grow the croton as a houseplant are familiar with it looking a few months in, if even that, sticks in a pot.
Yeah.
Yep. You know, it's just lost its leaves. It has these trying little spurts of new growth at the top, and it just never looks the way that it looked when you bought it inside. Also, they can be highly susceptible to mealybug, which is very frustrating.
Yeah.
So croton is by far my least favorite house plant. Not a bad plant, bad house plant.
Sure.
The runner-up, zebra plant or Aphelandra, specifically the Aphelandra squarosa. So zebra plant looks cool, always looks amazing when you buy it from a garden center. And from a garden center, you're usually buying it in like a 4 or 6 inch
oval leaf with a very distinct, bright white, heavy white margin.
And a yellow flower.
Yep. It's very stripy, hence the name zebra.
Yep. And then you bring it home, and within a couple months, it starts to lose foliage and starts to develop more of like this tree shape to it, where most of the foliage is up towards the top. It's lost a lot of its lower foliage. It started to develop more of this sort of trunky.
I wonder, is it more of a shrub in its native environment?
I think
probably?
So, yes.
Yeah. And we're treating it like a 4-inch annual.
Right.
Yeah.
And also extremely susceptible to spider mites and mealybug. I've lost 3 of them to mealybug, which is just extremely frustrating. And they seem to have very minimal defense or want to live after they have them. Right. It's like, I'm treating you. Come on. Like, let's get on back on track. And it's like, nah, you had one chance.
Yeah.
So the zebra plant or Aphelandra is a plant that I don't really care for as a house plant. Looking at it in a botanical garden, or if you have a greenhouse, so cool. As a house plant, where it's very hard to mimic the high indirect light that it needs while also the high humidity. Difficult as a houseplant.
Sure.
Number 3 is the Aeonium arborum. They're usually sold with other types of similar looking succulents like echiverias or haworthias or sedums or hens and chicks. It has that sort of floral look to it, even though it's foliage.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why it's called arboretum, being the species name, is because as they mature, they start to look like little miniature trees, kind of like
And those are definitely treated like a shrub in arid environments.
Yeah, like a succulent shrub.
And they get kind of those long, lanky, bare
tendrils.
branches.
They look like something out of a Dr. Seuss. It'd be like a Dr. Seuss shrub.
And a little puff of foliage at the very tips.
Right. And outside in a hot, dry area of your house in a container, super funky, interesting plant. Inside as a house plant, they, in my experience, and I've tried so many times with so many different cultivars, they just never hold up. They always start to slowly die and start to look terrible. Probably. And they seem to also, as far as succulents go, tolerate humidity pretty well, but like natural humidity, like hot humidity.
Yeah.
So like a St. Louis August is ideal temperature for it, but also extremely susceptible to spider mites. Just so frustrating. That has been one of my least favorite succulents to try to grow inside because it just notoriously dies. And my honorable mention is the string of pearls. Senecio Rollianus. And yep.
Your what hurts you?
Rollianus.
Gotcha.
Yep. So the string of pearl succulent, which is in the Senecio family, there's lots of things that are in the trailing Senecio. Also lots of other things that are Seneциos that you wouldn't imagine.
String of dolphins, string of bananas, string of turtles, chalk sticks, a lot of those succulents. Stuff that isn't trailing is very upright that you wouldn't expect.
Right.
It's a big category.
So, and the reason why it's like string of pearls, my wife is more into that than I am, and she loves the way that it looks, and it does look really cool inside
and you've
your
had
house.
Green and variegated,
right? Variegated's really hard to maintain.
Yeah.
So my wife has been for 6-8 years trying to figure out how to get these to thrive, and she has tried so many different techniques. And we have had some moderate success, but they always decline somewhat.
Yeah.
Even if you get them to survive, they always decline somewhat from the beautiful condition that they may have been in when you bought it from a garden center. Now we've kept them outside and treated them as just an annual hanging basket outside, and that's when they have performed the best. But inside, it's very tough. And I'd say of houseplants, that's as far as other people talking to me about their success rate, I would say next to the croton, just because of how popular it is. That's the one I've talked to most patrons about, garden center patrons about, why does it always die?
We
and
used
trying
to
to troubleshoot why it's always dying.
We used to keep a few as parent plants in the greenhouse. We would do a handful of succulents, not a ton, that were easy to propagate, and then quite a few herbs. Those did best after the greenhouses had been cleared out for summer because they just, the spring season with annuals had passed. It gets way too hot in there, even if you're venting the greenhouse all the time. And sitting in that hot greenhouse, getting forgotten about most of the time, it seemed like they stayed nice and full, but trying to mimic high light, low humidity, high heat, definitely makes them kind of a tough one to care for.
In your house, right?
Yeah, as a houseplant.
So once again, cool plants. My experience and my recommendation as a house plant is a negative on the ones I just listed.
So my 3 that I'll roll through real quick. Number 1 is the Neoregelia bromeliad family of bromeliads. And those are your more kind of short, squat, wider kind of foliage with a little serration on the edge.
Like pinks. Whether the
pinks and purples and purple
as far
with
as the foliage.
Yeah. They're generally, that variety is generally more prized for their foliage. And, little thing about bromeliads, if you've ever wondered why your bromeliad you buy from the store dies right after it blooms, it's because they die right after they bloom.
Yeah, they only bloom once.
Right. Most bromeliads in the time leading up to... Yeah, is that a good one?
Yeah.
In the time leading up to them starting to push that bloom stalk, they will often push off little pups, little clones of themselves. I mean, to try to grow those from seed would take an eternity. Fortunately, they kind of duplicate themselves just like a banana tree would. My issue with them, and leading into COVID, I was actually having some shipped up from Florida. I had met a guy down in Florida after the TPIE show, actually, and I was going to ship bromeliads up to Illinois to re-wholesale. And I think a week or two after I got my second shipment, COVID started and everything shut down. My issue with them is as soon as you take them out of that high light, high humidity, well, highlight for here, part shade for Florida, I should say. As soon as you take them out of that high light, high humidity environment, all those gorgeous bright foliage colors, the bright pinks and purples and maroons and so many fun colors. As soon as they're not in that highlight environment, they basically fade to a gross green, purple, or whatever that original color was, mostly green. You do also have to keep the cup in the middle of the plant where the leaves attach with water a good amount of the time. They are epiphytes. They're used to growing on branches of trees in a tropical environment.
So their root system is not designed to be this.
They're not getting a lot of nutrients from the roots. The roots are more structural or to keep them upright in the pot when they're in a container environment. So gorgeous plant. If you live somewhere southern that's high humidity and you're going to have them outside, gorgeous. I mean, Florida, they plant them in the landscape. It's just a landscape plant down there. But up here, especially where you have a long winter with short days, keeping those colored up and looking really nice, going to be really tough.
I've even had some where like the water that you put in the center of the plant doesn't get absorbed very quickly for whatever reasons.
And they don't like tap water. They're sensitive to metals as well.
But for whatever reason, it just wasn't absorbing the water, and so that water just sat there.
And gets stagnant and disgusting. It's really gross, yeah.
Ugh. I'm like, what is that smell?
Yep.
Like, oh.
Rotten bromeliad.
Ugh.
Yeah. Number 2, also another very high humidity tropical kind of plant for bright and direct light is generalizing kind of most orchids, most tropical orchids. If you have a high indirect light area and really like to spend time taking care of your plants weekly, twice a week, maybe orchids are for you. And don't get me wrong, the blooms are stunning. Such a crazy amount of color and flower shape, fragrant. There are some of these that are so incredibly fragrant, they'd fill up a room of your house. Again, in the right environment, absolutely gorgeous. But they have a very particular growing media that they like to be in. They like to be watered a couple times a week sometimes because, again, they're more epiphytic. Those roots that are in that very coarse, chunky growing media of like bark and charcoal and lava rock that's usually in there, or coconut core chunks. That's really there more for structure. Those roots want kind of moisture, high humidity all the time, but not enough to rot the roots. Which often happens.
And some of those roots can even pull from the air.
Yeah,
too.
Some of them want to photosynthesize, like the Phalaenopsis or the moth orchid that you see in most grocery stores and box stores everywhere. That orchid that you see, they are often, you see them in a regular planter pot. But if you take those out, they're actually almost always in a clear liner pot because those roots prefer to be exposed to sunlight because that's how they are naturally. So with some of those things, again, fertilizing, they want to be fertilized all the time, but very low concentration. They don't like tap water, so you pretty much have to use like distilled or reverse osmosis water to keep the roots and leaves from burning. The ones that you like put an ice cube on once a week.
They don't like eye contact.
Right? Yeah. If you look at them sideways, they don't like it. And I've tried a lot of varieties. I've even had like the Vandas that you see hanging
Cattleyas.
Mounted in the little wooden box that, those, they like high humidity. You have to mist them like twice a day to keep them alive. Orchids are a lot of work. They're also not the cheapest of houseplants. So
I've always found it surprising. Some of the people that I've discussed that have really struggle with other types of plants, all of a sudden they're great with orchids.
Yeah.
I'm like, how do you kill every other plant?
Right.
But yet you have like, oh yeah, I have like 6 orchids. I love them. They're so easy.
Right.
Like, no,
that is interesting. I have the people I know that are really into orchids. They're really good at keeping their orchids alive.
But will kill you.
They're into like that category of plants.
Right.
Yeah.
Just that.
Right.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And then number 3 is the Majesty Palm, and that is that kind of green 3 to 5 foot. They get obviously taller, but you often see them for sale in like an 8 or 10 inch pot, 3 to 5 feet tall. Just looks like a green palm tree. They're everywhere at Home Depot, Independent Garden Center, everywhere. That palm tree that you're seeing, whatever you're picturing, that's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
They look great at the store, but they're very susceptible to scale and spider mites and mealybug, overwatering, underwatering. A lot of times you bring them in.
Too much light, not enough light.
Yeah, if you put them out.
Nitrogen deficiency. Yeah.
If you put them out in full sun by your pool and don't keep them watered all the time, the leaves are going to brown and yellow. If you put them inside and they don't get enough light, the leaves are going to brown and yellow.
You don't fertilize them appropriately, and the leaves are going to brown and yellow.
Yeah. So if you have a chance to pick one of those up, just skip it.
If you have a chance to pick it up, after you do, drop it.
Right. Yeah. Treat it like a short-term annual. And then my honorable mention, plot twist or pot twist. Hey, not all the jokes can be good.
Tell me about it.
Are decorative use only pots for houseplants. And I don't want to call anyone out directly.
Right. It sounds like this store that you get craft got Schmeichel's.
Yeah. Schmeichel
or Schmobby Schlobby.
Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby. Sorry, I have a little bit of allergies. I don't know what they're using to glaze those pots.
But it is not good for your plants.
If you plant a plant in there, I have had a 100% success rate of those plants dying very quickly.
And a lot of those pots, really, if you look at those pots that you're buying from a craft store,
if you don't read the little
most of them
sticker,
have a sticker underneath that says not for use with live plants or not for edible use.
Or they might just vaguely say decorative use only. And it's like, well,
right.
It's decorating my plant.
Something's happening with that glaze, I believe, that
as
when you add water to it,
yep.
It's releasing whatever chemical was used to whatever, make the sheen, make the color. Now your plant is absorbing it.
Yeah.
And I have killed a number of plants too by also experimenting. Because you'll see this, it's gorgeous, this cool little houseplant container at Schmeichel's, and then all of a sudden,
or Floppy Bobby.
I like Floppy Bobby. Yeah. And you put your plant in there, and then like 3 months later, like
less.
Right. Like
less.
What is happening?
Yeah.
And then I've experimented like using that same pair of pants, is what I refer to pots sometimes as pairs of pants. And I'll use that same pair of pants for another plant, and then that plant dies.
Yeah.
And then I'll use that pair of pants for another plant, and then that plant dies. It's like, so really be extremely cautious, or just don't buy your containers from
maybe if you plant your
hobby store.
If you plant your house plant in like a plastic liner pot, or like the plastic pot it comes in, take it out of your decorative pot, water it, make sure it fully is drained, no dripping water, no standing water that's going to be in the bottom of that pot, and then drop the liner pot with your plant back in that decorative pot. You could probably get away with it there, but that's kind of a hassle to have to like individually carry all of your houseplants out of their pots in the liner to the sink, water it, let it drain, It's just a hassle. So that is why those decorative use only pots in relation to houseplants are in my honorable mention of my...
That was a pot twist.
Of my least favorites. Yeah. So,
there we go. That's our top and bottoms.
That's it. And I'm sure we can use this as a recurring segment later, because there's so many houseplants out there, so many more that we had a hard time narrowing down our favorites. And also we could make a list 100 long of our least favorites, but those were some of the ones that came to mind.
Yeah.
So definitely check out our website at takeititorleafitpod.com. All of our socials, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube are at Take It or Leaf It Pod. Please do check out the Patreon page if you would like to support the channel, so that Ethan and I can afford to buy our gummy vitamins and keep the
ran
recording.
Out last night.
Oh,
I took my last ones.
So we need at least a couple new subscribers on Patreon. On Patreon, we release extra clips and content, 2 extra episodes a month. In theory,
we just started.
We're coming out of our busy season here, and so we're we're doing our best on that one. But yes, if you would like to support the show financially and also get some extra content from us, we are on patreon.com/takeItOrLeafIt. And otherwise, all of our other links will be posted in this episode description. And until next time, this has been the Take It or Leaf It podcast. I'm Nick Farringdon.
And I'm Ethan. Wise.
There you go.
Yeah.
See you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.